Hi, environmental science. It's me again. I'm going to be talking right now about our slide presentation. So I'll be going over a number of those slides and then we'll stop at a certain point. So kind of keeping up with the pace of what we were planning on doing today. So just to go back to the plan for today, I crossed out the bio blitz because we're not in class. I already posted a video for the syllabus, and right now we're here on the presentation. I posted another little video about what to do with the study guide as well. So the idea for the presentation is that you'll be taking notes or something that you can reflect back upon to fill out the study guide. Okay? So you can find the presentation linked right here in the weekly plan or under assignment 3 right here. Okay? So a couple of places. I have it open right here. And let me get starting on it. I'm going to try to move my picture a little way. All right, so kind of the starting slide refers to kind of a Iroquois prophecy or a thought system about thinking about the next 7 generations. And that's what environmental science kind of does, is looks in the future, the next 7 generations. So it's not just like the immediate future. It's what's going to happen in the future too. Okay? So environmental science is the study of the interactions of humans with the natural environment, and that environment includes all living and non-living things that we interact with. So that's the entire biosphere, like that little layer of living things on the earth, in the soil, and even above the earth in the air. All right, so that includes climate, soil, landforms, water sources, and other living organisms. And one thing I like, and I mentioned before, is environmental science is complex and interdisciplinary, which means that you look at lots of different fields of study. So that's what this image is showing here. This kind of takes, environmental science kind of takes all of these into consideration. So that's why I think it's really cool, because you get a little snippet of lots of different sciences, and you don't just kind of specialize. You're interdisciplinary. You understand a lot of different things. Let me move my picture again. So looking, when we're talking about history, we're going to go back as far as the beginnings of civilization. So here is what's known as the Fertile Crescent between the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Caspian Sea. So let me get my picture out of the way if you can. So here's the Arabian Desert there. Egypt's over here. So in 2400 BC, the agricultural fields of Samaria had production rates similar to what we have now, about 30 bushels per acre, which was amazing. So they irrigated, which is just the artificial application of water. So they brought water from other sources. So here's the Tigris and Euphrates River. And again, Fertile Crescent, kind of the dawn or the cradle of civilization is what some people call it. Picture again. So all water contains small amount of minerals called salt. And in that Fertile Crescent, that salt built up in Mesopotamia over time. So the yield slowly declined, and by the 7th century AD, slaves had to be used, or they chose to use slaves, to strip that salt layer away. So let me move that so you can take a look at that. So the soil could still be farmed. But by the 16th century, the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia was a salty wasteland. So we talk about this example because it's one, it has 2 important concepts that kind of it illustrates. So the Law of Unintended Consequences, which states that the actions of people and governments always have unexpected effects that we don't always know ahead of time. And then unsustainability, a condition that can't continue at its current rate. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of that now too. So in the 1800s, I think, there was an ecologist named Garrett Hardin. He wrote an essay called The Tragedy of the Commons, and it described a major source of environmental conflict. And these resources that are not privately owned or regulated will be depleted. So things that were in common will often be depleted or overused. So like people's self-interest takes priority over the best interests of the population. We actually saw this case in point with you guys when you did the goldfish activity. So the tragedy of the commons, go fish activity. How many of you guys overfished and died your first round? I think like many of you did. So because you all took the maximum amount of goldfish, so we had to restart the game. And so that was an example, and that's why we do that activity. You are not alone. Many students do that. All right. So here's an example or kind of explanation of that tragedy of the commons. So a small village contains mostly farmers that raise and sell sheep at a nearby city. The only place for the sheep to graze is in a common area in the center of the village. So a common is an area that belongs to no one. It's shared by the entire society. The villagers in this situation, they have an incentive to obtain and graze as many sheep as they can, and that can result in overgrazing. That's a picture of overgrazing here. The second village has its grazing land divided into 9 fenced sections, each of which are owned by a different family. And so these families are going to carefully control it because they know that it's their land and they have to use it for the long term. So that was, let me go back to that. So that's kind of an illustration, of tragedy of the commons. So you have to put some parameters on things sometimes. So climate change, air pollution, water pollution, overfishing of international waters are all modern examples of the tragedy of the commons. Overfishing in the ocean, spewing out pollutants into the air because nobody owns the air. This is happening all over the world often. Right? So in the United States, now we're moving on to the progressive era. So this lecture is going to kind of go through different eras in environmental history. So the progressive era is when Teddy Roosevelt was president. This is when the national parks were established. So the goal of this period of time was to prevent destruction of commons like unsustainable logging and hunting. So Teddy Roosevelt is credited with kind of being one of the leaders or the founders of the environmental movement. I don't think he set out to do that. He was actually a really big hunter and all of that, but he saw the destruction that was happening. So national parks are preserved areas that are relatively unaltered from their original state. So there's no fishing, logging, commercial hunting, or livestock grazing that can occur. Let me step back a little bit too, and when I mentioned that Teddy Roosevelt was a hunter, I didn't mean that hunters can't be environmentalists, but I don't think he set out to be known as an environmentalist is what I meant. I think some of our hunters actually do a lot of preservation of land, and so that's kind of goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. I just wanted to restate that. I wanted to make sure no one misunderstood that. All right, so another type of land that we have set aside is national forests. These are federally managed, but do allow commercial logging, recreation, hunting, and fishing with limits, right? They have parameters on those. Move that up here. And then we have national wildlife refuges. They do not allow commercial activities, but they can allow hunting and fishing. So my hunter students, this might be where some of you guys go duck hunting and goose hunting and things like that. So we're really lucky out west. We have lots of wild land. So I just wanted to throw that picture in there. Take a look at Alaska. A lot of wild land, a lot of public land. So this is all like kind of national forest land. There's a little key here too. We're surrounded right here by public lands as well. Klamath, Shasta Trinity, Modoc. We have Lassen National Park down here, Crater Lake up here somewhere. There's lots of public lands up here, so we're really rich in that, rich in resources. All right, moving on. So Hetch Hetchy, I want to talk about that as well because you guys are doing I have a little assignment this week about it. So years after the national park system was established, San Francisco experienced a big earthquake and followed by a massive fire. So what's the year that the earthquake happened? 1906, if you guys don't remember. So 90% of the damage was due to the fire that exposed the city's inadequate water supply. So there's still some neighborhoods of San Francisco you can see that did not burn. I think that might be in the Haight even, where there's some of those older houses, but quite a bit of the city burned. So the city applied to the federal government to construct a reservoir in the Hetch Hetchy Valley of Yosemite National Park. So here's Yosemite, here is San Francisco, and there's actually an aqueduct that they wanted to build here. So in order for that dam to be constructed, a law would have to be passed by Congress and signed by President Woodrow Wilson. Pretty controversial back in the day. That's why you're going to look at it as an assignment. Moving again. So Hetch Hetchy leads to the emergence of two major philosophies in environmental ethics, because one, the national parks were preserved to not allow for any development, hunting, logging, and they wanted to build a big dam in the middle of the national park. So your homework this week, I want you to look at more deeply into the history of it and reflect on what you've learned. So that's an assignment I'm going to go over next. Okay, so there's two trains of thought. Anthropocentrism is a human-centered philosophy, so that's why humans are up at the top here, and that promotes human interest or well-being at the expense of all other factors. So Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, kind of thought to be the father of the Forest Service. He is kind of associated with anthropocentrism. Okay. Moving my picture for this one. There's another kind of train of thought. The ecocentrist is a nature-centered philosophy. So humans are just kind of part of the whole web of life. And that places intrinsic value on ecosystems regardless of their usefulness to humans. So John Muir, founder of the Sierra Club, big advocate for Yosemite National Park, he is kind of the father of this kind of train of thought. So in the assignment, you guys are looking at the two different thought processes or, philosophies, and I want you to actually take a side and see which one you identify with. And there's no judgment from me. I just want to know what you guys think. So construction of the dam began in 1914, and it's still actually in use today. So Pinchot summarized the conservation ethic philosophy of that planned regulated utilization of environmental resources like this. Where conflicting interests must be reconciled, the question shall always be answered from the standpoint of the greatest good for the greatest number in the long run. And that's kind of like the Forest Service philosophy, the greatest good for the greatest number. So that's why they have that multiple use philosophy. Okay. So conservationists were most concerned with resource depletion, and they categorize those natural resources into four groups. So inexhaustible resources like sunlight, renewable, that can be replaced but might take a long time, like timber and soil. Non-renewable resources that can't really be replaced because it takes millions of years, so coal, oil, natural gas, and then recyclable, which can be used more than once. I'm going to see if I can hit pause on this now. All right, did I? No. I can't end it. Stop. Why is this doing it? So here's my blooper for y'all.